one swallowed by the light. Spira Bridge Year 2, Day 9, 12:15. Alarms were blaring all over the place, and the shields were taxed to the maximum, but Spira was still around and fighting for her life. It had been over a minute since she had been swallowed by the shockwave from Project Backlash. "Tilda, come on, girl, you can do it." Tilda Vale's fingers flew over his controls as he tried to keep the ship together. Suddenly, there was a jolt, and the pressure on the shields went down. "Are we out?" Vale asked. "No," Levine said. He hit several keys. "Between." The event was so violent it sent out several shockwaves. "He's right," Porter said. "We're between two shockwaves. One is positive, for lack of a better term, and the other appears to be negative." "So we're at the point where the two cancel one another out?" Vale asked. "Yes, sir," Porter said. "And if we can use the thrusters and sublight drives to stay here, we might be able to ride it out. All we have to do is wait until the shockwaves fade. But there's no telling where and when that will happen. The sensors are all overwhelmed." "Still, it's the best plan we've got," Vale said. "It's the only plan we've got," Tizalo said with a smile. Vale snickered at that. "Tilda, but sometimes all you need is one plan." Tilda, he told Tizalo and Levine to go for it, and with them taking of the ship, he could turn his attention to the crew. He grabbed his radio and contacted Dr. Bennett. Fortunately, the doctor told him that they had only suffered minor injuries, and the infirmary staff were already working on those, so now it was simply a waiting game. Spira Briefing Room, Year 2, Day 42, 11:59. Sinara and Nikita Aronov were sitting behind their laptops. The table was filled with paperwork and artifacts. They had used every inch of space in the science lab, and the briefing room was barely used, so it was now Science Lab 1A. The shock waves of the Backlash incident had been just under a day to fade to the point that Spira could push through without any damage. But that had been fine with Vale, because it gave them time to make repairs and figured out where exactly they were. As the effects of the Backlash incident had faded, something else had drawn their attention. Until now, Spira's AI had not been very active. But now, the AI had suddenly come to life. To begin with, Spira was not on the same course as Destiny had been when she had passed through this galaxy. And all the worlds Spira had suggested stopping at had been ones with ruins of civilizations. Aronov, Haley, and Porter believed that the AI was looking for something. This was backed up by something that was now happening every day, which was why Vale came in and sat between the two of them. At exactly 1200 hours, the two laptops changed to a program. It had 3 data streams side by side. The left one was from the seed ships, the middle one was from Destiny, and the one of right was Spira's telemetry from the last 24 hours. The AI was comparing the 3 streams and looking for differences. "How long has it been doing this?" "A week," Aronov said, "and every day it's the same. The AI spends an hour going over the data, and then it starts a 23-hour countdown." "So, what's your best guess about what it means?" "Well, we know for sure that the AI is looking for something," Aronov said. "But we don't have enough pieces of the puzzle yet. I want to see what happens when we pass the point where Destiny left the galaxy. Because I figure that's going to be the best clue we're going to get, sir." "How long until we reach that point?" 9 days. "Okay, stay on top of it," Vale said. "And if Spira is making comparisons, maybe it's making notes somewhere. Let's see if can find that file." He stood up. "If the border crossing doesn't tell us anything, we're going to need a plan B, and let's see if we can up with a plan C as well. We have enough problems as it is. The last thing we need is a crazy AI." Aronov gave him a nod, and Vale walked out the room. He needed to relief Major Levine on the bridge. Spira Gate Room, Year 2, Day 55, 13:16. It had been 4 days since they had passed the border of what the crew had begun calling Destiny Space. The ship was still looking for something, but that was not on Vale's mind, as he led NR-1 and NR-5 through the Stargate to 2HR-145. The ship was low on water, so the two teams were going for a collection mission together. Both teams were understaffed. NR-1 had lost Alex Patterson due to her reassignment to Exodus 1, and NR-5 new Asuran members were still on Freedom Prime. After getting the green light from both General O'Neill and the President, Vale had promoted T. Zalo to Staff Sergeant and offered the open slot on NR-1, which he had taken. As for NR-5, while Klaus, one of the botanists, was coming back to the team, the other member was not. Frank had been one of two new Asurans who would staying behind on Freedom Prime. Valerie Watson, who was the commanding officer of Epsilon, when one of the SG teams based at the Epsilon site had recruited him for her unit. Which was fine with Vale, because it finally gave him an opportunity to rearrange the NR teams. Right now, the kind of missions they could handle was kind of rigid. NR-1 was recon, NR-2 was science, NR-3 and NR-4 were security, and NR-5 was resource collection. His plan was to make NR-3 and NR-5 more flexible. His first decision was to upgrade Sonara's title from crew member to archaeologist. He had then offered her Frank's slot on NR-5, which she had accepted. Next, Andrea Jones had been promoted to corporal and been made acting CO of NR-3. Her slot on NR-5 had been taken by Private First Class Vladimir Golov, a Russian Marine who had been assigned to NR-3. Golov was a good soldier and had been promoted to corporal as well. And NR-5 team leader, Henrietta Hetty McConnell, had been promoted from Private First Class to sergeant. With a hydroponics expert, a security officer, and an archaeologist, this new NR-5 was a very different beast than the old one. As for NR-3 other two members, there was Private First Class John White from South African and First Lieutenant Tamara Cho from China. Cho had swapped teams with Alec Carlson, making her the security officer for NR-2 and him NR-3 resident engineer. It also made John White the default second-in-command of the team. And finally, if everything went according to plan eventually, Spira would arrive at Freedom Prime. At which point, Captain Laura Cadman would join the crew as the new head of security and commanding officer of NR-3. But that was still a long time in the future. For now, however, Vale had two teams to lead. They were making the trip in Puddle Jumper 1. As soon as the ship passed through the event horizon, the wormhole disengaged, and with Vale off-world, Jennifer Haley was in charge. She was not the bridge, however, having left Major Levine running things up there. Instead, she was headed for Science Lab 1A. Carlson and Aronov were studying the data they had on Spira's search, and they were not alone. The room was occupied to capacity. Nearly. Tilda Carlson had saved her a seat. She thanked him and sat down. "So, what do we have?" "A theory," Carlson said, "but you're not going to like it." "Tell me anyway." Carlson nodded, and then began explaining what they thought Spira was looking for. A snake in the head. Chaser Corridor Year 2, Day 50, 0820. Pelops was pleased. The Goa'uld parasite which called itself Verash had successfully taken over Dr. Park, and he had 2 additional parasites. Tilda and I know exactly who to put them in. Tilda, while Dr. Park had been a random selection, he had chosen his remaining spies in advance. Tilda, hence the clothes. Tilda. They were wearing as close to Icarus base uniforms as they could manage, hoping to blend in with the crew. If everything went according to plan, it would allow them to implant their targets unnoticed. Then they would leave the ship by means of the Stargate and make their way back to Goa'uld space. Before he could ponder how long that would take, they reached their first destination. "Status of dampeners?" he asked. "Holding, my lord," his first prime said. The dampeners were devices they were wearing that kept the chaser's internal sensors from detecting them. Pelops nodded and opened the door. Much to his surprise, their target was actually in his quarters. Tilda, I thought he was on the bridge. Tilda, but Pelops did not mind. It would simply make things easier. Greetings, son, he said with a smile. Are you not going to greet your father? How did you? That was as far as Illy got before his first prime shot him with the Zat, and he went down. The Jaffa picked Illy up and put him on the bed, while Pelops took out another cylinder with a Goa'uld. These Goa'uld had been spawned by the same queen that had spawned him all those years ago. Soon, he and Illy would be family again. Chaser Park's quarters, Year 2, Day 50, 0820. Lisa Park was in hell. The Goa'uld had taken complete control of her body while she had been pushed back into the darkest corner of her mind, and there was nothing she could about it. She kicked and screamed, but to no avail. She wanted to cry, but even that was beyond her reach. Tilda, I read the reports, but nothing ever prepared me for this endless suffering. Tilda, and endless it would be, because even without a saprophagus, a Goa'uld could life for centuries. Tilda, 400 years in this, Tilda. Tilda, well, this stinks. Tilda, another voice said, while Goa'uld was walking her body towards the mess hall. Tilda, who are you? Tilda. Tilda, I am. Tilda, there was a pause, as if the other person was thinking. Tilda, Scorpius. Tilda, there was another pause. Tilda, and yes, I just made a Farscape reference, it's a good show, and I know what you know. Tilda. Tilda, are you the Goa'uld in control of my body? Tilda. Tilda, no, his name is Varash, and being a Goa'uld, he is a total asshat. I am, Tilda, he paused. Tilda, hang on, I have an idea, Tilda. Suddenly, Park was no longer in darkness. Instead, she was standing in an endless white space, but the place was not entirely empty. There was a pair of chairs with a table between them, and sitting in one of those chairs was a Nakai. The other chair was empty, so Park sat down in it. It was only then that she noticed that there was a tea set on the table between them. The whole thing was weirdly comforting, but also surrealistic. You're a Nakai. Sort of, Scorpius said. Lisa, do you mind if I call you Lisa? She nodded that she did not object. She knew she was taking a risk, but something told her that Scorpius was a good guy and that she could trust him. Did the healers on Freedom Prime ever tell you how they restored your eyesight? No, they did not tell me the details. They gave you a blood transfusion from a Nakai. It allowed your body to repair the damage to your eyes. Except, he paused, giving her a look that told her that she would not like what came next. It appears that they unknowingly also transferred the Nakai genetic memory to you. The Nakai have genetic memory. Yes, and I am the manifestation of that memory, Scorpius began. It was dormant in your brain, but when Mr. Asshat took control, well, it triggered a defensive response, building me out of the knowledge of the Nakai and your memories. And here we are. So, what do we do now? Well, I think we need to kick Varash to the curb. As he said that, a door rose from the floor of the white space. You game, Lisa. The two of them stood up, and Scorpius offered her his hand, which she took. Then the two of them walked to the door. Park opened it to reveal a dark space beyond. Inside that space, she could hear snakes slithering around. There were also display cases in this space, which appeared to represent her memories. Tilda, that's the part of my brain Varash controls. Tilda, the fact that Scorpius was there to help her made her feel better. Park took a deep breath, and then they walked into the darkness. Destiny Gate Room, Year 2, Day 50, 0833. Ginn was in the gate room, enjoying some alone time. After they had gained access to the hydroponics bay, they had trimmed the plants back to normal sizes and harvested all the food they could. It had left them with a considerable stockpile. Next, they had seen about the source of the magic can of oil that had saved them from starvation. It was then that they had discovered the presence of a group of nanites created by a race called the New Asurans. The good news was these nanites were intelligent and friendly. The bad news was that they could only control so much of Destiny's systems. By collecting all the uniforms, scattered all the rooms they could access, they had been able to provide the nanites with a stockpile of material. The nanites had then turned that stockpile into a small power source. It provided them with enough power for the hydroponics bay, the gate room and the corridors connecting the two. Alas, because Destiny was still in paranoid mode, this did not get them much. The control panels for the Stargate were now powered, but they were still locked out. As for the nanites, they were now all clustered one of the empty stasis pods, where they were transforming into a new Asuran that Ginn and Dr. Perry had begun calling Ben. He was called Ben because the body he was building was the exact image of Captain Benjamin Sisko from a television show called Deep Space Nine. Suddenly, her alone time was ended when Dr. Perry walked into the gate room. "Ginn, we need to get to the stasis pod corridor," she said. "I think Ben is about to hatch." "Lead the way." Ginn followed Perry out of the gate room. She had been worried that the construction wouldn't been finished before Destiny dropped out of FTL. And that would mean that the nanites, without which they would still be stuck inside the computer, would be left behind. Tilda, of course, that's presuming we figure out a way off this ship. Tilda, and now that they had food and water, perhaps it was safer to stay aboard Destiny, because some of the planets out there could be pretty hostile. They entered the stasis corridor, and Ginn pushed all her worries aside. For now, they had something else to focus on. Lisa Parks mined the Dark Zone Year 2, Day 50, Time Unknown. They had reached the heart of the Dark Zone, which surprised Park. "Tilda, why hasn't Verash tried to stop us?" Tilda, the place looked like Destiny's gate room, except for the fact that the Stargate was missing. In its place stood a throne, and on that throne sat a version of Lisa Park with solid black eyes. She was wearing a black monk's robe. "You were fools to come here," Verash said, "because here I have the power." Lightning arced around her hands. Unlimited power. "Really?" Park said, while Scorpius rolled his eyes. "I mean, could you be more rip-off and cliché?" Instead of replying, Verash threw bolts of lightning at the two of them. They dodged the bolts, but some kind of tentacles began growing from the floor and grabbing for them. Park focused, and suddenly she was holding a lightsaber. Taking a deep breath, she began chopping at the tentacles. Meanwhile, Scorpius had created a shield and was using that to protect himself from the bolts. This was fine with Park, as it kept Verash distracted. Then one of the tentacles grabbed Scorpius and began choked him. So Park ran towards him, chopping tentacles left and right. Finally, she reached Scorpius and chopped him free. "You will never." That was as far as Verash got before Park swung her lightsaber and chopped off his head. The Goa'uld's head fell to the floor and dissolved into light. Then his body followed. Seconds later, the whole area began transforming into light. Park turned to Scorpius, only to see that he and his shield were fading away. "Scorpius, what's happening to you?" "The threat is gone. You no longer need me," he smiled at her. "Now, wake up and go mess up Pelops Day." Before she could reply, she realized that she was standing in a corridor, and that she was back in control of her body. "Tilda, it's over, at least for me, Tilda," but as she flexed her fingers and took a couple of steps, she realized that she remembered bits and pieces of Verash's knowledge, including the fact that Pelops had brought 3 parasites. "Tilda, oh no," Tilda, she bolted down the corridor. There was a Goa'uld she needed to stop. Destiny Stasis Pod Corridor Year 2, Day 50, 0837. The stasis pod had opened, and Ben had stepped out. He had been in complete working order. "Tilda, now there are 3 of us, maybe 4. Tilda, Ginn thought as she watched the man in the only active pod. They had left him in stasis to stretch their food and water. But for the look on his face, Ginn got the impression that Ben wanted to change that, so she turned to him. "What are you thinking, Ben?" "Well, I have an idea," he began, "but you're not going to like it." "Look, the power source keeping the hydroponics bay going will run out fuel in a couple of days," Ben said. "And then we'll have a food and water problem. Not to mention the fact that if the plants die, we will lose our source of oxygen." "Tilda, well, that settles that. They had to get off Destiny or they would die. She got a feeling that the part she was not going to like would come next, and then Ben continued. But if we take him, Ben gestured towards the soldier in the stasis pod. Out of stasis, I could remove some components from the control console. If I then swap them with their counterparts in the dialing computer console in the gate room, the AI would think that it is this console. Meaning that the controls should work again. Can we do it without thawing him? Perry asked. No, if we don't thaw him, the AI won't fall for the modification and the controls won't come back online, Ben began. And I know thawing him is a risk, but it's either that or nothing. Ginn sighed. Then she made her way to the control console. This might blow up in our face, but like Ben said, it is this or nothing. She exchanged a look with Perry, who nodded in approval. Taking a deep breath, she began pushing buttons. The stasis pod deactivated and then opened. Its occupant opened his eyes. When he saw them, he swallowed. 3 theories: kicking ass and getting out of Dodge. Chaser Corridor Year 2, Day 50, 0842. Ronald Greer was ready to kick some ass. He had been on the bridge when Lisa Park had come in. She had pushed some buttons on one of the consoles, and then an alarm had begun blaring. It turned out that Chaser had been boarded by 3 Jaffa and a Goa'uld. Colonel Young had ordered Greer to gather a team and deal with them. He had left the bridge right away, so if Park had explained how she knew about these intruders, he hadn't heard it. For some reason, the Goa'uld were hanging out in an empty set of quarters. Like shooting fish in a barrel. Greer looked at the other members of his team, which included Lieutenant Matthew Scott. So have you ever fought Jaffa before? Scott asked. No. By the time Greer had been drafted into the Stargate program, the Goa'uld had been defeated and dust of the Ori War had begun settling. They had reached the Goa'uld's position. Scott gave hand signals, and the team took up positions. He nodded, and Greer pushed the button to open the door. Here we go. The door opened, and they opened fire. They had caught the enemy by surprise, which resulted in the 3 Jaffa not having even the smallest slither of a chance. All 3 of them went down instantly. Pelops, however, had a personal shield. The bullets bounced off and he was left unharmed, which allowed the system lord to use his hand device to send out a shockwave. The team ended up falling to the floor while Pelops made a run for it. But he did not get far because a knife hit his left leg. He went down, allowing the person who had thrown the knife, Lieutenant Vanessa James, to make her move. She hit the system lord with the butt of her rifle. His eyes rolled in his head and he passed out. How did you know that would work? Greer asked. I read about Goa'uld shields in several SG-1 reports, James said. Get him to the infirmary, Scott said. Yes, sir, Greer said. Greer and James picked up the system lord, while Scott went into the quarters and set to examining. The last thing they needed right now was more surprises, so he would make sure that there were no more hiding in this place. Destiny Gate Room Year 2, Day 50, 0905. Dennis Alexander Young was no longer a viceroy private. His chances of making it home were practically 0. Especially on my own. So, for better or worse, he was home part of this tiny crew. Just the 4 of us. At the moment, he was helping Benjamin with getting the Stargate controls back online. There was a loud click, and then Benjamin closed the console back up. Young checked the controls and found that they were ready to go. It's working, Young said. Now all we have to do is figure out a way to drop Destiny out of FTL so we can get off. We'll need a Kino and a gate remote before we do that. Otherwise, we'll risk being stranded on a planet unsuitable for long-term survival. Young paused. What is our long-term plan? Having the capacity to use the gate will only get us so far. One problem at a time, Amanda Perry said as she walked in. For now, this our long-term plan, and we've wired 2 Kinos and 2 gate remotes into the power source to charge the batteries. So back to the original question, Young said. How do we get Destiny to drop out of FTL? The problem is that in its current state of mind, so to speak, Destiny will only drop out to recharge. And without control of the systems, we have no way to drain the power surplus. Not to mention that because the ship is much better condition than it used to be, the surplus is much bigger. How much bigger? Young asked. When Colonel Young and his crew came aboard, the ship's buffers could store less than 40% of the original capacity. The Vicerant repairs brought them back up to 99.7%. So Destiny could dial Earth now? Ginn asked as she joined them. In theory, Perry began, but I wouldn't recommend it. Draining the buffers that fast would probably burn them out, which would start a chain reaction that would destroy the ship. However, a dial to a gate inside whatever galaxy we're passing through should be totally safe. Because that requires a lot less power, Ben said with a nod. Okay, so we can leave the ship without it blowing up, Young said. But we still have to drop the ship out of FTL first, and we still don't have a way to do that, which brings us back to the buffers and draining them. Actually, I have an idea about that, Ginn said. The other turned to her, while Ginn began explaining what she had in mind. Her plan was a long shot, but she was convinced that it was either this or nothing. Chaser Infirmary Year 2, Day 50, 0938. Pelops was a god, a false god, a dead false god. After he had been brought to the infirmary, he had been secured to one of the beds. All of this was because of Dr. Park, who was sitting on another bed. After she had reconfigured the internal sensors, the computer had told them in a rather loud voice that it had detected Goa'uld aboard the ship. So Young had told Greer to deal with them. He had then asked Park how she had known about the Goa'uld. She had said that she needed to go to the infirmary so that Tamara Johansson could explain what had happened. TJ had examined her and had then made a report to Young. She had found a scar at the back of the Park's neck. The kind of scar that was left behind by a Goa'uld entering a host. So she had put Park through a scan, which had found the dead remains of a Goa'uld parasite wrapped around her spine. Park had then told them about Scorpius and how Varash had been vanquished. It was at this point that Greer and James had come to the infirmary with Pelops. He had been tied to one of the beds, and one of the Nakai crew members had donated some blood. After Pelops had been sedated, TJ had injected the blood straight into the parasite, which had killed it stone dead. Thus, the person on bed was Samuel F. Wallace and not Pelops. He was currently sleeping after his liberation. So that was not why Colonel Young had been called to the infirmary by TJ. What she had called him for was the condition of Ellie Wallace and Lieutenant Anna Deacon. Ellie had been picked as a host because he was Pelops' son and key to Chaser's scientific efforts. Deacon had never been in the forefront, having been part of the trial of Colonel Young after Sergeant Spencer's suicide. But she was a floater, helping wherever she was needed. So putting a Goa'uld in her would have provided them with intelligence from all departments. So, can you cure them the same way you cured Pelops? I've examined both Lisa and Mr. Wallace, and from what I've seen, it should work, Johansson said. So far, neither of them seem to suffering side effects, but I want to keep them under observation for another day or two. Okay, Young said with a nod. And I want them injected right away. The last thing we need is Goa'uld spies on the ship. TJ nodded and began giving orders and preparing for the injections. Young wanted to stay and watch, but Chaser dropped out of FTL and he was called to the bridge. So he headed out and left TJ to get on with it. Destiny Gate Room Year 2, Day 50, 12:05. It had taken several hours to set up Ginn's plan. Said plan was a desperate gamble, but it was all they had. Instead of draining the buffers, they would make Destiny think that they had drained the buffers. To fool the ship, they would infect several key points with new Asuran nanites and deploy a computer virus. It wouldn't work for long, because the countermeasures would kill the virus after a couple of minutes. And that would be all they needed. Tilda presuming it works. Tilda Ginn thought. Tilda if it doesn't? Well, with my luck, we'll probably be stranded. Tilda and they would run out of power and food, which would be a death sentence. With everything in place, they had all gathered in the gate room. They had all the food and water they could carry. Tilda, lucky for us, there were some backpacks in the hydroponics bay. Tilda, there had also been several Vicerant flasks in storage there. Here we go, Perry said. So, Ben began, who wants to push the button? Ben was holding a small silver box with a red button. Pushing the button would transmit a signal that would activate the nanites, and seconds after that the virus. Above the button were two lights, one for the activation of the nanites and one for the activation of the virus. If everything went according to plan, the two lights would turn green. But the real proof was if the ship dropped out of FTL. Ginn nodded and grabbed the box, while Perry readied one of the Kinos and Young stood behind the dialing computer. In 3, 2, 1, she pushed the button. Now, all they could was wait and hope it worked. Spira Briefing Room, Year 2, Day 56, 0800. The mission to collect food and water had been a success. They had come back with several crates of edible plants, including some food that was potato-like, and some cucumber-like food, and 2 large tanks full of drinking water. So today, Vale had his hands free for a science briefing that he had not gotten around to yesterday. When he got there, the place was very loaded to capacity. But Sonara had saved Vale a seat, which he took. So, what's this infamous theory that I'm not going to like? We figured out what Spira is looking for, Haley said. We studied the telemetry she collected and the ship's computer code. Then we ran a process of elimination until we were left with the planet builders, Porter said. The AIs currently seems to think that they are the key to cosmic background radiation signal. The problem is that, so far, the only no-planet builder world is Eden. Eden was a planet that had appeared out of nowhere. Both it and the star it orbited had been built by an advanced race known only as the planet builders. And that is far behind us. Do we have any proof that there are other planet builder worlds? Not so far, Haley said, and only time will tell us if our hunch is right. Okay, Vale said, but I do have one problem with all this. We can't keep calling them planet builders. We need a better name for this species. He paused. So, suggestions? Zavaris, Sonara suggested. Zav is Zivalo for mystery and Eris means people. Sounds good to me, Vale said. Zavaris it is, but don't bother changing it in the old reports. We'll start using it in the new ones. Vale leaned back. But if Spira hasn't found any traces of Zavaris civilization, what has she found? That you're not going to like either, Coulson said. So far, we haven't found much, but what has been there seems to belong to the race that build the Berserker drones. We seem to be heading straight into the heart of their former space. In fact, we figure there's a 70% chance that we'll reach their old homeworld in the next couple of days. So, we're living in interesting times. Coulson nodded, and Vale leaned back. His instincts were telling him that their trip through Destiny space would be a bumpy ride. But that was fine with him. He had not signed up for boredom. 4 Dust and Answers. Unknown Planet Desert Year 2, Day 50, 1207. The good news was that the virus had worked and Destiny had dropped out of FTL. The bad news was that they had only had a minute before the ship would jump back, and there had been only one Stargate in range. So when they had seen that it had a breathable atmosphere, they had jumped through the gate. Which was why they were now standing in the middle of a harsh and apparently endless desert. Ginn took a deep breath and turned to Dr. Perry. Please tell me that are more Stargates in range, she began. Because if there are not, we are in major trouble. I'm reading, Perry worked the gate remote. 2 gates in range. They stepped back, and Perry dialed the first Stargate. When she saw the telemetry, Ginn realized that this planet was not a good place to go. Tilda, ouch, that is the only thing worse than this place. Tilda, the planet had a toxic atmosphere and was a frozen wasteland. It reminded her of a planet Ellie had told her about once. He had called the Hoth system. Perry sighed. "I'm sorry, Ben." She handed him the gate remote. "But we need that Kino back, and you're the only one who can go get it." "Understood." Ben dialed the Stargate and stepped through. Less than a minute later, he returned with the Kino. As soon as the wormhole disengaged, they dialed the gate again. Alas, the second planet was also unsuited for them. The atmosphere was breathable, but the Stargate was surrounded by 2 lava flows. So there was no way for them to explore the planet. Ben ended up retrieving the Kino again. "Great, what do we do now?" Ginn said. "What about using the Stargate on the second planet as a stepping stone?" Perry asked. "No such luck," Ben said. "The gate there only connects to back here. The one on the first planet had 2 other addresses, but without a way for the 3 of you to breathe." "That would be a death sentence," Young said. "We would need time to make sure those 2 new addresses are safe, and we wouldn't have it." "Well, we can't just sit here," Ginn said. "She's right, we should start looking for shelter and resources," Perry said. "So, which way shall we go?" "We know nothing about this planet, so any direction will do," Young said. "I vote for straight ahead." Perry nodded, and they headed out. As they did so, Ginn held up her hand and looked at the sun. Fortunately, there appeared to be only 1 star in this solar system. The bad news was that they could not tell if it was setting or rising, nor did they know what the day-night cycle was on the planet. Their arrival here had been a giant leap into the unknown. Now it was time for them to find out where they had truly landed. Goa'uld Hatak-class ship bridge, 03.0-1.2002, 0711. Pelops left his sarcophagus and made his way to the controls. It was a slow walk, because his host was old. Tilda blasted Takra. Tilda more than 1,000 years ago, Pelops had been experimenting with time travel. But the Takra had sent several agents to sabotage his efforts. And while they had been killed in the process, they had succeeded in that mission. Instead of traveling through time, his ship, which had been fitted with an experimental device, had been thrown into the void between galaxies. It had taken him all this time to return to the galaxy. Other system lords now ruled the Empire, his territory had been taken, and all his Jaffa had died during the trip. Tilda, this ship is about to fall apart. Tilda, his host, was the only living thing still aboard, and he lacked resources, so he had not been able to perform maintenance on the ship. Tilda almost there. Tilda, this meant that the ship's condition had deteriorated. On the bright side, he was approaching a planet with a breathable atmosphere. All he needed was to get there. Tilda, where am I? Tilda, he checked the star charts, considering it a miracle that his computer still worked. The planet was at the very edge of the galaxy, but did not have a name. Tilda, fat load of good that does me. Tilda, with considerable effort, he managed to put the ship into orbit. That done, he made his way to the ship's last functioning escape pod. He stepped inside and closed it, then he pressed the button to launch it. The pod exited the ship and rushed towards the surface, its outside heating up as it did so. Behind the pod, the Hatak finally failed. Because of its age and condition, the craft no longer had the power required to remain in orbit. Instead, it also fell towards the surface. But unlike the pod, it was in an uncontrolled descent. The craft hit the surface before the pod did, exploding in spectacular fashion. And the ship was not the only thing to shatter. Because at its heart, the experimental time machine had remained. Its exotic energies were now unleashed, hitting the space-time continuum like a sledgehammer. Existence itself was torn, creating a hole that swallowed the pod and its occupant. After more than 1,000 years, Pelops had finally succeeded in his goal of unlocking the secret of time travel. Chaser Infirmary Year 2, Day 51, 0905. Ellie had listened to his father as he had unfolded the story of how Pelops had discovered time travel. He also knew this tale to be true because he had this memory from his short time as a Goa'uld host. So he looked at Colonel Young, who was standing nearby, and nodded. Somehow not that anybody understood why the former hosts had been granted Pelops memories. Tilda, but not the memories of the rest of the Goa'uld. So what's up with that? Tilda at least suspected that this was a deliberate act by somebody. But he had no idea or proof who or whom that could have been. So he said nothing. So, if this Goa'uld could time travel, why didn't he alter the timeline? Young asked. Because he liked the timeline as it was, Sam said. No competition and nobody looking for him. I asked Lieutenant Scott to do some digging and he said that, according to the Tok'ra records, Pelops was blown up in 993 AD. He paused. And yes, they are sure, they lost 3 agents on that mission. From what I heard about them, they're not the kind to forget that sort of thing. What did he do? He bided his time, rebuilt his forces, and learned about his enemies. That's when he learned about, Samuel sighed. Us, Marion, he took Ellie's hand. It almost became too much for me. I had my bags packed, but, he shook his head. I went to a bar to get a drink, and a tear rolled down his face. I decided to go back. You didn't come back, Illy said, pulling his hand away. You left us. No, I didn't, Illy, Sam began. That asshat Pelops used his time machine. That was the day he took me. He is telling the truth, Illy, Young said. During his examination, TJ checked his biological age. He is 12 years younger than he should be, and the only way that is possible is if he time traveled. There was a long moment of silence. Can I have a moment alone with my father? Young nodded and left the two of them. Sam sat down next to his son, then put his arm around him. There was another moment of silence. Then Ellie burst into tears, and soon Sam joined him in crying for the woman and the life they had lost. Unknown Planet, Desert Year 2, Day 51, 0605. They had gotten lucky. The sun had set 2 hours after they had begun walking. If it had not, they would probably have died. But because the sun had set, they had been able to keep going. But it had not led them anywhere. They were still in the desert and there was no end in sight. The small group had walked many kilometers from the Stargate during the night, so going back was not an option either. Now, Ginn was looking at the sky and doing the math. She figured that they had about an hour before the sun came up. We are in big trouble, Young said. We need to find some shelter, Ginn said, or else. That was as far as she got before the ground opened and swallowed her. When she stopped falling and sliding, Sheehan was in a corridor. There was a set of doors at the end, which were stuck partially open. She made her way through them and gasped at what she saw beyond. Spira Bridge Year 2, Day 60, 1035. Spira had found more and more traces of the Livexona. Like Zavaris, it was a combination of 2 words, but these were Nakai. Leva meant machine and Zona was the word for builders. But while Zavaris was usually used as a word, Livexona was often shortened to LX or 60s, because of LX in Roman numerals was 60. There was, however, one major hiccup. The Livexona homeworld did not have a Stargate, so getting down there might be more complicated than usual. Vale wanted some time behind the Spira's flight controls, so Jennifer Haley was in the command chair. We should be in the solar system now, Haley said. I think it would be a good thing to take a closer look at the other planets before he reached the homeworld, so let's drop out of FTL right here. Dropping out it is, Vale said. Vale dropped Spira out of FTL and plotted a course that would give them a good look at all the planets ahead of them. There were 5 of them, with the 3rd looking the most friendly to humanoid life. The outer world was a gas giant, and the 4th one looked like a deep, frozen ball of ice. No signs of life on number 5 and 4, Porter said from one of science consoles. Sonara, Haley began. What about the orbits? Anything up there? No, Sonara said from the other science console. There is nothing orbiting either planet 4 or 5, her board beeped. But planet 4 has a moon and that has something in orbit. She worked her board. Something really, really big. Colonel, That sounds like something we need to take a closer look at. Plotting a course, Vale said, while hitting the proper buttons. Spira made a slow turn towards their new destination, while Vale maxed out the sublight drives. It took a couple of minutes, but then the object came into view. Porter frowned when she saw it and ran several scans. Then she turned her chair around. "Is it me?" she began. "Or does that look like?" "Charlie," Sonara began. "No, you are right. That is Charlie," she paused. "So, how does a Viceroy research station without any engines end up here? In fact, how did it even survive? We barely survived." "Good questions," Haley asked. "Let's run every scan we can, and let's park the ship." She got up and made her way to Vale's console. "I also think that we might have to use one of the puddle jumpers to send a team over there. We don't have spacesuits, but we have several oxygen tanks in the infirmary that, with a bit of creativity, could be modified to allow our people to move around any airtight spaces we find in there. Call Dr. Bennett, get it set up." "Yes, sir." Haley made her way back to the command chair to contact the doctor. Whatever the answers to the question of Charlie's survival were, she had the feeling that they were about to go on a very interesting mission. Earth Stargate Command Year 2, Day 62, 0800. General Hank Landy was reading several very interesting reports. The first was about the Nakai. It turned out that several Nakai officials had engaged in political mutiny. Intercepted communications had revealed that several Nakai colonies close to the edge of their home galaxy had detected the Livexona ships in the void. They had reported that to the Central Authority, which had done nothing. But the officials on those colonies had suspected what would happen next. So when they had been ordered to prepare a new fleet to pursue destiny, they had not obeyed those orders. Instead, they had planted officers loyal to them on those ships. The fleet had departed as ordered. But after the fleet had traveled to the next galaxy, the officers had taken over the ships. The original and now abandoned supply colonies had been picked based on location. But the Nakai had surveyed more than just the worlds they had ended up settling. The new rebel fleet, as it was being called in the report, had set about creating new colonies. But these new ones were based on population instead of location. And then, the new rebels had begun evacuating people from Central Authority space. To keep under the radar, they had only been evacuating backwater planets. In the meantime, the tension between the Central Authority and the Gynaco Empire was rising. It's only a matter of time before all hell will break loose there. But thanks to the new rebels and Heprimians, the Nakai would survive as a species, no matter what. He put away that report and moved on the next one. Spira had found the Viceroy research station they had codenamed Charlie. Not only had the station survived, it had aged several thousand years. A team led by Vale had recovered the logs, or what was left of them from the station, and had learned something that they had not believed at first. But their visit to Livexona Prime had proved their findings on the now ancient space station. When Operation Backlash had gone horribly wrong, it had launched the black hole on its course towards Novus. But it had also launched Charlie through time and space. The station had been badly damaged, but somehow several of the crew had survived. Those few survivors had settled on Livexona Prime and become the first generation of the local population. But despite their best efforts, there had not been enough of them to man a fleet capable of defending their planet. And thus, the Livexona Berserker fleet had been born. Then, they had encountered the Zivalo Empire, and everything had gone horrible wrong. As for Livexona Prime, it was a world without a Stargate that was covered in ruins. Back in the day, the local technology had advanced so far that the drones had not recognized it as their own anymore, so they had attacked and wiped out everybody. In the thousands of years since, the planet had healed, and all Vale and his people had found was the echo of a tragedy. After collecting what supplies they could from the planet, Spira had moved on. Finally, there was a report from Colonel Telford on Freedom Prime. The Primians were still working on a cure for Lieutenant Johansson's ALS. The good news was there had finally been some progress. The bad news was that several ingredients of the potential cure could not be replicated on Earth, which pissed off the researchers who had developed a deep hatred of the disease and who wanted nothing more than to eradicate the condition from the universe. Tilda, they are good people. Tilda Landry closed the file and hoped that they would be able to keep them safe.